Welcome to the Chorus One podcast. In this podcast, we explore the emerging open financial system facilitated by scalable, interoperable blockchain networks. Tune in every Monday to dive deep into cutting-edge projects and protocols with Chorus One team members and guests.
Hey, welcome to the Chorus One podcast. I'm here with Dillon Chen, co-founder of Commonwealth Labs. Welcome, Dillon.
Thank you for having me.
So yeah, we're here in Berlin in the Full Node office, recording from the studio. And last year you went to Web3 Summit and you unveiled Edgeware.
Unveiled, yes.
Yes, and so maybe, today we're going to catch up on what happened in the last year and what Edgeware is. So why don't you give us a little background?
And it's actually been less than a year because Web3 was in October and it was stacked so closely to DevCon. I'm glad that they kind of separated out this year, but it's been a kind of a wild ride. So, I mean, maybe even a little more context on Commonwealth Labs. So right now we're a team of 5. We are hiring. So if you're looking for engineering work, please hit us up. But in general, we're focused on governance. So we have kind of 2 products. One is a governance interface that's called Commonwealth, and then Edgeware is kind of the main focus right now. Edgeware is a smart contract platform, a Polkadot smart contract platform. So you can write WASM smart contracts, you can have on-chain governance decisions, and then you can vote to fund things from an on-chain treasury as well. So those are the kind of 3 core features. And basically we went from announcing it, doing a little bit of work on the chain, speccing out different features, running several test nets, doing a token distribution with this thing that we call the lock drop. And we could definitely talk a little bit more about that. And we'll be launching September 15th. So it's all been very, very exciting.
That's soon. That's like a month away only.
I'm
sure you're very busy. Exactly. So you already mentioned maybe the most well-known feature about Edgeware. It was this lock drop, this kind of new way of distributing the tokens. So maybe, why don't you go a bit into what the lock drop is, how it was, like
all that stuff. So I think to start at the beginning again on how it all came about. So we knew Edgeware, we wanted to be a proof of stake network from day one. And so obviously with Ethereum transitioning from a proof of work to proof of stake chain, that was one method to distribute tokens. And obviously we saw during 2017, a lot of ICOs happen to a pretty successful level. And then, one of the maybe additions that came alongside that was airdrops or things like that. But none of those things really felt so aligned. You might have brought in investment capital or kind of just casual users that might not be actually actively developing or working on the chain. And so we wanted to find a middle ground there. And we took a lot of inspiration from live peer, from conversations we had with advisors and things like that. And we ended up on this concept called the lock drop. So any individual participant could come and participate to the level that they wanted. All they have to do is lock ETH for 3, 6, 12 months, and they would get it obviously back at the end of the time. And then they would also get Edgeware token when the network launches. And then we added in this separate feature called signaling. And so basically you just have to sign a carbon vote style transaction from your wallet. And then at the end of the lock period, you would get basically 20% of the token that you had at the address at that time. And so, I mean, it's funny, all these podcasts we did, we weren't really able to talk about the numbers, but it's basically almost all said and done. And so we're really happy with the results.
I just looked at the participation statistics and here you can kind of see, there's over 1 billion Ether locked and $1 million Ether locked. Billion would be probably pretty nice. And signaled even like 1.5 million Ether. So if you look on the side, I will put it also in the show notes. You can see like a lot of statistics. So I guess it was very successful, or how do you feel about it?
I think we feel pretty good about it. I think the largest token holder right now is, I can't remember, but like 6 or 7%. And like, it looks like the distribution has been kind of pretty fair. We haven't done like the actual like Gini coefficient measurement yet, but eyeballing it, it looks pretty good. And so we'll actually probably work on the statistics, but I know we had a few goals with it. So people who can guarantee the economic security of the network. So people who might have had a larger interest within locking, and then also people who are validating. So there's around 150 validators that are people who have flipped a Boolean to say that they want to be a validator. And so we've been in contact with them, and so we'll definitely have like the people that we need to start the network. But it's kind of really up to everyone who's participated to come in and participate in the governance to kind of shape the chain in the future.
That's good. Gets us like maybe to the next topic already. So you mentioned there's these validators. So I'm assuming Edgeware is a proof of stake chain, and now all these people will get their tokens, and then they will stake it with these validators. So maybe you want to talk a bit about how will the staking work?
Definitely. Yeah. Maybe are we going too fast through all the topics?
That's a good question.
No, it's so Edgeware, we inherit a lot of features from building on Substrate. And so a lot of the things that out of the box, we didn't want to work on the networking stuff. So just being able to not worry about peer discovery, all these other things. The consensus engine using Grandpa as well as Or and Babe, there would be a governance vote on that as well. And then the things that we focused on were more of the governance components. But for staking as well, there's two different things. So right now we're using nominated proof of stake. So when you can nominate several different people and your stake will be spread amongst all these validators. And the goal of it is an algorithm so that we can actually just basically have a more distributed staking network, essentially.
Yeah, that makes sense. So maybe, to reiterate, like Edgeware is going to launch its own chain, right? But it's like built on this substrate, so it's very compatible to the Polkadot ecosystem.
Yeah, that's definitely more, to talk about there.
Yeah, so I'm sure we'll like also get back to some of the topics, but maybe we can kind of go straight there.
Under direct conversation, no worries. You can jump however you want.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe let's talk straight away, like how is this relationship to the Polkadot ecosystem? Like, do you imagine Edgeware, will it become like this parachain, or what is like the future of Edgeware? And then once we would say there is maybe Edgeware would be a part of the Polkadot ecosystem, what would happen to the Edgeware token kind of in your view, maybe? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, those are a whole host of very, very interesting questions, on the governance level as well as the crypto economic level. So there's a few factors at play within the Polkadot ecosystem. So people can bid on different parachain slots to basically have the guaranteed security of Polkadot and as well as to pass messages back and forth. And so I would say maybe there's even a misconception, but a lot of interesting things are happening now. So Kusama, the testnet that's running for Polkadot right now. So Edgeware testnet or even Edgeware mainnet will potentially be a parachain on that network. And so we'll kind of run through the whole process of becoming a parachain before Polkadot actually launches. So we'll be really excited to participate in that process. And so what you kind of alluded to on what might happen with the Edgeware token is a really interesting one. It comes down to a few things. It's how much kind of value does Edgeware provide as a smart contract platform or a parachain to the parachain ecosystem? And then what are the actual economics for becoming a parachain slot? So right now, when you become a parachain, you're giving up the returns that you might make for staking as a parachain, right? And so whatever the yield might be on that, that's what you're foregoing in terms of opportunity cost. And then given the limited number of parachain slots, especially at the beginning, it might turn out to have quite a high basically opportunity cost per year. So I think we've talked to a few people in the community and it looks like it might be something like, I think we've talked about like, $500,000 maybe in terms of US dollars.
Yeah.
And so it would be a question of one, what would the validators on Edgeware, because we are launching as a solo chain. And then how are we going to make up that basically staking bond essentially?
Okay. Yeah. So essentially you have to buy the dots, right? And you lock them and then you can't stake them anymore. That's what you're talking about right now, right?
Yeah.
But so the idea would be that the Edgeware token holders together buy these dots and then kind of get a slot, or how is what is the
Well, so that's kind of what I mentioned, how much value that Edgeware might bring to the ecosystem as well. Because if it does bring value and like there's more fees potentially going to the Polkadot validators, then Polkadot or like the DAO that kind of is attached to Polkadot might actually maybe subsidize that. Or it could be the other way around where Edgeware validators are wanting to become a part of the ecosystem because there's more value flowing the other way. And so I think we'll kind of see that when it kind of plays out in the future, but it could go either way. So there is the Edgeware treasury, essentially. So 10% of inflation in the first year will go to this treasury to either build out other features on the network, whether it's dev tooling, potential grants to different developers on the network, or it could just be burnt to make sure like everyone is okay with that. Or it could be used to fund some type of parachain offering in terms of us becoming a parachain slot on Polkadot.
That does sound really interesting. So that would be like a vote, right? We have this funded treasury and then there's like a governance proposal. Let's fund this thing.
Right.
Or do you have like very specific ideas how this would work? Is it like one proposal type or do you have like different proposal types? And,
yeah. So
is that already like...
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to think through there. So we built a number of governance features from least binding to most binding. So we built basically just an on-chain identity module. So you can tie a claim from Twitter, from GitHub, from other kind of any arbitrary social network. And so you should be able to link someone's voting profile essentially to that identity. In the future, we want to kind of enhance this to include zero knowledge or pseudo-anonymous identity. So say your Hive score within like the Ethereum community is like a 99 out of 100. you don't want to reveal what your identity is. So you'll be able to like vote with, hey, I'm an influencer within this space. And then the next kind of ring inside that is the signaling module that we've built. So basically, they're non-binding votes, but you can have delegated voting for this kind of process. So whether it be something like this that we just talked about, should Edgeware become a parachain? Let's gauge the community. You can do a binary vote, ranked choice, a number of different voting proposals, and we'll obviously enhance that over time as well. And then we kind of get to like core Edgeware and then also Polkadot governance as well. So there's democracy. And so everyone, it'll be a token weighted voting with the longer you kind of like stake or lock your vote, the more voting power you'll have. Mm-hmm. And then there's also this kind of core concept of a council. And so they'll have more influence over the network. And so those are kind of like elected positions, so to speak.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a lot of governance layers that are there.
It's an onion.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe like the one thing you mentioned there right now is this kind of lock weight, which I find interesting. So basically you stake your tokens in another way. Could you like still participate in the staking part if you do that?
It depends. There's different use cases. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, I'd love to learn more about that, but I guess that maybe that's a bit too deep for this one right now.
It's okay, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So maybe let's get back to jump back. We went very far into the depths of the governance question already. But maybe like one question which may be kind of vaguely related to governance is this recent controversy almost that happened. So basically, this lock drop that we also just talked about, I will just explain it to the audience what kind of the problem is, I guess. So basically, you mentioned the signaling process where you don't really send or lock the ether, but you kind of say, this is my address, this belongs to me. You get like a part of the tokens for doing this. And the Edgeware lock drop, the signaling mechanism was possible to kind of use it with a contract address as the person that deployed the contract. So then what happened naturally is like some owners of big contracts were using this mechanism to signal. And among those is the Web3 Foundation. And now as a result, or like there was some kind of a bit of an uproar on Twitter, let's say, like, and the result of that was actually the fork of Edgeware. And I'm sure you heard of it. It's a straight edge. So basically what they are doing is kind of the same distribution mechanism, but without this contract signaling and like some other facts. So maybe, what's your opinion of all this?
It's really interesting. Well, one, I'm for all this kind of experimentation in the crypto governance space. I don't think we would be where we are without that type of spirit. So I definitely encourage it from that perspective. And I think there's things within the lock drop itself. It's definitely been the first of its kind, so to speak. And so again, on the experimentation side, always looking to see more so we can gather more data points on what we hope can be like a more fair type of token distribution. I think the three things that have kind of changed, and then maybe even another point to add on to that is, so Straight Edge also changed the timing of the tokens allocated to signalers. So on Edgeware specifically, 25% of the tokens will be allocated at Genesis essentially, and then the remainder of that will be allocated at the end of the first year. And so one thing we said, okay, if you're not really quote unquote putting skin in the game and you're kind of like spectating, you'd have to wait a little bit, right? And you'd have to forego, again, the opportunity cost of working on Edgeware. So that was one feature that is also another experiment within Straight Edge specifically. And so I'm actually curious to see how that part plays out. And then the other thing with respect to, I think there was also kind of an uproar with DrawDAO, essentially. So after the DAO all went down, I guess, was it Nick, I think, signaled from that address and quote unquote threw away the private key afterwards. And so like those Edgeware tokens will kind of remain dormant essentially. And so I think with all these things, obviously forking is a natural governance choice, but also the onion layer of on-chain governance that we've kind of outlined, we hope can also resolve or kind of improve on this process, right, in the future. So what are the things that we should do with the withdrawal DAO token? Like we'll have a series of governance signaling decisions even before the chain launches itself with the Genesis distribution. And so we'll definitely let the community kind of gauge for themselves before we launch. So it'll be really interesting to see. And again, experimentation is good. That's how we all learn.
That's really cool. That's nice that you kind of almost encourage it here. And like, are you in contact with the Straight Edge people, or like, do you think there could be a way to work together with them, or like experiment even more?
Definitely. I think if everyone plays nicely, then we'd be happy to support it, Cool. And I think if we're talking game theoretically, tit for tat, I feel like, as long as we haven't tatted, or acted like in a non-zero sum way, then we can hopefully work together essentially. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah.
And likewise on the other side.
Yeah. So let's hope they also see it like that. So you mentioned this kind of innovative token distribution mechanism. And yeah, it's a really interesting topic. Just like if you see all these proof of stake chains that are around now, or like not around yet, but like that raised funds in the last few years. And like you said, probably many of those have like a very skewed token distribution where it's kind of maybe, especially after the ICO hype, when it all moved into this SAFT distribution. So they all have these kind of tokens held only by a few bigger investors. And now probably they need to find out how to get like the broader public engaged. And do you think they should also do something like a lock drop, or what mechanisms do you see other than that to distribute the token?
That's a really good question. I mean, so there's 3 thoughts that come to mind. I think when we talk about token distribution, even if a person is running like a company, who is on the board definitely matters, right? There's like Carl Icahn, who might take over a company and say like, okay, I just want to issue a bunch of dividends. And so if your kind of like token holder base is a little bit different, then, you know, decisions or the governance itself might be swayed. And so that's kind of one thing. I think, and the second thing I would say is for Edgeware, I think it hopefully kind of harkens back to like, I don't want to say OG crypto. I wasn't really around at that time, but you know, hopefully it's kind of a more open participatory environment, and where actually people feel more energized to be a part of the community and to like add their kind of niche to it. And then I guess the third thing I would say is we've definitely been approached on the Commonwealth side to talk about distributing or engaging certain segments of the world, I guess, from different manners. So whether it be like a kind of token distribution to GitHub holders, or people who've contributed to open source projects, or, you know, might even just be influential on Twitter, there's these different graphs that we kind of want to access and add to it. And so I think the notion of locking can be generalized to like staking some portion of your identity or things like that. And those are the things that we're working on. I think every community wants to grow, and they need certain skill sets to onboard them. And so, yeah, I think the notion will kind of continue to grow and evolve from there.
Because right now, with this lock drop, like 100% of the Edgeware tokens will be distributed that way. But do you think in the future you would like distribute some more portions of token in some different way, like you just mentioned? So that's like from the treasury part, or would you like issue new tokens with a governance vote or something? I guess everything is possible, but...
You know, anything is possible. Kevin Garnett, that's a US basketball reference. But it's a really good question. So I think one thing that we'll definitely try to do in the beginning is to have the community set the tone on what it feels like is appropriate in terms of inflation or not, right? And so we'll be very interested to see over time how that happens. So I think one thing that we definitely want to see is like, is this kind of like not arbitrary inflation, but inflation above what we might say in the treasury, is that acceptable to the community? Or under what circumstances is that? If we add, you know, something like a huge core network upgrade, like sharding, if that were something and the network found it to be so valuable, then we might have a portion of the chain go to, you know, this set of addresses that actually worked on this feature for the chain. Or it might come out of the treasury itself. Fundamentally, I guess it is still run by a bunch of different people that have their different interests. And so like a company or like something else will have to run those experiments. I think we certainly have our views at Commonwealth, but we definitely want to hear everyone else's voices. I think that's the spirit of decentralization. We're definitely trying to get there as soon as possible.
That sounds great. So maybe like, you mentioned right now, if there would be like this upgrade like sharding and you issue new tokens to kind of finance it, let's say. But like, right now, this Ether lock drop, obviously there was no money. You don't get any money from that, the Edgeware team or Commonwealth team. So how does it work? Like, who are the developers? How do they, like, are they financed?
Yeah, definitely send bread our way. So we're at Commonwealth Labs. So I think when we originally started, we talked about doing a governance interface. And so in some ways, we had equity investors that believed in that vision. And so they were safe investors into that. And so this was something that kind of like came along as well. And so we've been basically funded through the safe investment that we have from there.
Okay, interesting. And like this governance interface, maybe that's also, we can talk a bit about that. Like, would it be, you would want that to be integrated also to kind of in Polkadot or some other blockchains? Are you like actively working with them?
Yeah, I can talk more about that. So as Kusama comes online, we'll definitely want a series of governance proposals. I guess to talk about the architecture a little bit. So it should be a normal web app with basically tied into a bunch of different blockchains to allow for on-chain governance. So essentially every governance kind of module that we expose on Edgeware, identity, signaling, democracy council, treasury, those are kind of like hooked in to the front end. And the same thing will happen for Kusama, for maybe Tezos or like Maker or any of these other tokens. And then hopefully we should be able to build a network effect of all the interested participants in the ecosystem. A lot of people that we've talked to, whether they be token investors, validators, like they work across all these different networks. And so having one place where all this kind of like decision making is happening would definitely be helpful. And so our kind of thought process for that is just onboard a number of chains, Kusama, Polkadot included, ChainX and the other Polkadot ecosystem participants, and then kind of go from there, to other ecosystems as well.
Yeah, that sounds cool. It sounds definitely like something that's needed. Like, I guess we see a lot of the governance participation in parts in projects being very low, right? And like making it easier through like a nice interface. Hopefully we'll push it a bit. I guess you also seem to be working on a lot of different ways to maybe get more participation. Like right now, what do you see as the interesting experiments right now in crypto, or what do you see like as some interesting governance things that are live right now?
Oh man, well, so I'm really excited about the DAO activity that's kind of been going on. So Ryan Zur kind of announced that he's working on this. I don't want to the DAO 2.0, but certainly something in the same. Yeah. So that's one experiment that I'm very, very excited about. And I think more just like general governance experiments. So really testing, so hopefully scientifically, like what decision-making methods actually work better at first, or like what circumstances. And I think we just need more shots on goal to basically do that, to borrow another sports metaphor. So I think one kind of like pie in the sky idea that would be very interesting to me is for the Edgeware treasury to, if we'll have a DAO module or a set of smart contracts that, make it easy to spin up a DAO. And so seed these DAOs with like $50 each, and then just have them participate in the DeFi ecosystem. And so that's like the fitness that they're kind of not competing against, but like it's an objective measure. And based on the different decision-making methods, is it just internally the 10 of people or 10 people that are making decisions in a DAO? Are they using a prediction market? Are they going to be just a majority vote? Is it only 2 necessary for a decision to kind of come across? And then to see kind of the types of decisions that arise from that. Yeah, that'd be one thing.
That sounds pretty cool, definitely. But yeah, you kind of just, maybe you don't really test which decision-making thing is the best, but who are the better participants that make better decisions.
That's like always, it's always one thing that's entangled. Yeah. So, I mean, if we want to call it a protocol and we can always kind of enhance it, it's like, okay, so even if you cast kind of a decision, like you should be working within all these different DAOs, right? So like you're still going to be a voter in like DAO A and DAO C. And like if you vote yes, quote unquote, your decision will register across these things. So we can potentially run, I don't know, some type of study there. And I guess I use study deliberately. I haven't written any of this down. So I would welcome all ideas and suggestions, preferably through the interface, so we can vote on it, discuss it, signal it, and then kind of implement it all in one place.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I mean, just like from experience from us, like running validators and being like on Cosmos now for a few months, and also me like following Tezos and some of the other projects that have on-chain governance, you can see like the frequencies, like as in how many proposals are made even, or like what makes it to a proposal stage or what's only in a forum post. Sometimes there's very big differences between those. Like how do you think you can get people more engaged? Like, for example, say like now in Tezos, there were like only 2 proposals, but they were kind of bigger ones and had like lots of things built into them. In Cosmos, we had a few more, like I think like 13 or something, with like some very small, like only one variable changes. But still, like how do you think about this kind of overhead also? Like if there's a lot of proposals maybe for validators or for people that participate, it's actually like they don't want to spend so much time on it. Like,
it's a really great question. And actually, I think it comes back to one of the things that you alluded to before on just like running this kind of type of DAO experiment. It comes back to the people and like how the community evolves, right? If we look at like states in general, it's like some people have different parliamentary types of decision-making processes, and like a bill might have a bunch of different sub-proposals, amendments attached to it, or it could just be like a small thing and pass more easily. And so it's really early in the governance process in general. So we'll definitely see how that kind of transpires in the future. I think another kind of important difference, and we'll see kind of how it plays out for Edgeware specifically, but right now it's validators to participate in the governance process, and then the delegators are able to kind of like veto that, right, and cast their own vote. So within Edgeware specifically, you can delegate your staking right to someone. or set of individuals. And then you can also basically delegate your voting right to another person.
Oh, so they're separated.
Yeah, separated, yeah. And so if given that chains, we're curious to see kind of how the community evolves from there. But I think a lot of it still comes down to friction on just like the voting. So having one integrated place where we see the proposals, we can discuss them, and then cast a vote immediately. Just like that, I think will raise things. And so there's things within the middleware layer of just making the wallet, the transaction signing. That is the key point of friction right now, honestly. Yeah, I'm sure you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even sure if sometimes it's also just like knowing about these issues that are being discussed, right? There's probably like only a small set of participants that even have the A, expertise, and B, like the time to spend on stuff. And then it's more like people rely on what this other person thinks and like just vote the same way. So I guess this delegation system kind of maybe naturally gives that like the right balance. But I'm also thinking about like, I think in Cosmos it's working pretty well. And just by this tying of the governance and the staking economics together, it also creates like this validator that is more like a governance focused body. Definitely. But in an Edgeware system, maybe, you kind of separate these features out, right? Maybe you have like one person that only does like the infrastructure, and then you have like some more governance focused parties. But would they be like also rewarded through block rewards for governance?
Participating in the governance process?
That's
actually been brought up to us, I guess, like in Telegram conversations would be, well, the two things. It's like helping move the governance process along. So Coinbase Earn might have kind of incentivization for learning about a protocol. And so that might be one thing for participating in the governance process, voter rebates, if you might want to call them, for just participating in this process, or potentially kind of remunerating just like counselors or people who participate. One of the things, if a politician runs for office, right, and they win, they're paid, right? And they can actually focus on these things full time. But I'm sure we'll see as these systems evolve and actually scale, like a whole kind of like cottage industry kind of like pop up around this to support the decision-making process, right? And, I feel like I've used a lot of kind of meat space or real world examples, but we have a voter participation problem in the US. And so there's like mobile voting solutions that are trying to pop up over there. So making that process secure, easy, so you can actually vote on your mobile phone and to disseminate information. It's something that everyone has faced, and we'll try to add to it, but it's always going to be an unsolved problem.
For sure. I mean, like, I guess sometimes people also just don't want because they're like frustrated with the system itself. So I guess there's like lots of dimensions
you
there.
You can always fork. There you go.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That was, very insightful. I think, there's probably we could spend another half an hour just talking about it. And I also like that like taking the real world examples makes sense, right? I mean, there's like a body of governance history from like the ancient Greeks or whatever. You could probably study lots of these forms and maybe try to adapt them to the crypto ecosystem. And like, that's probably some experiments there.
Yeah. The one thing I want to add, I guess is I talked about a company as like one example and like a board or something like that. But there's other governance models like cooperatives, other things like that kind of like are real world examples. Wawa is like an example of like a corporation in the US. So they have basically it's privately owned. And when you work there 2 or 3 years down the road, you'll get your stock in the company, right? So they become incentivized and they kind of move up through the company itself. So hopefully decentralizing that process instead of being, again, like maybe something that's more investor owned. But I think actually like ETH 2.0 is like one really interesting example of just like a decision-making process that's really interesting, right?
Yeah.
So like a bunch of different, not specs, but implementations coming together and like actually changing things instead of maybe one person setting, quote unquote, like a very concrete path. That's something that I think is maybe still one difference that will happen within this kind of decentralized decision-making space. That was kind of a very abstract example, but I'm hopefully we can take something from that.
Yeah. I mean, Ethereum, that's probably also like another thing, like this whole question between like this kind of off-chain governance and on-chain governance.
Yeah.
Is there even decision-making process? How is all this?
I think when I think about like on-chain or off-chain, I think it's so the Commonwealth vision is like, we just want to support any governance process, right? Because we know that it just may be difficult in general, right? Because you said, what you alluded to before, it's difficult for, maybe a casual kind of observer to like participate and get involved or even learn the right information. And then whether it's on chain or off chain, I think really comes down to like the specific protocol itself. And we'll kind of see from there.
Yeah, I think even in these on-chain systems, in many still there is like the off-chain portion is also pretty big in there. So it's like nothing is like really all on-chain governance.
In complete contracts. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's we always have to resolve things in another way.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So maybe like tomorrow, let's wrap up slowly. Let's go back to like just the actual network and kind of, you said it will launch next month, basically. So are you having like a test net right now, or what are the plans there kind of?
So we're doing a test net, and I guess that kind of like, it'll be kind of a gradual kind of release. So we'll launch probably with token transfers off in the very beginning, and then a governance vote will kind of like turn it on in general. So we can just test out the governance functionality, staking functionality, all these other things. And so that'll be a gradual process. So running a testnet now, and then creating the Genesis spec for like the new testnet, where we have the same set of validators or just like network participants that participate in the lock drop, and then letting them kind of like participate in this whole process, and then turning on token transfers. Yeah.
Okay, so that would mean like you have the validators, they kind of register now. Is there some registration form, or how do I become a validator on Edgeware?
So actually that's a really great question. So within the lock drop process, individuals are able to basically flip a Boolean and say like, I want to be a validator. And then for validating on Edgeware, you have to have 3 keys. And so, there's a session key, there's all these other things, just for, I guess, like security reasons.
Yeah.
But for actually participating, so if to be included in the Genesis spec, there's a few things we would like for validators to do. The first thing would be to participate in the testnet now. So validate for at least a week. The second thing would be kind of like on the Commonwealth site, basically register, like talk about like your stated governance positions on basically all the things that we talked about in the course of this talk.
So we don't have to do anything anymore?
No, you guys are good. Seems like you guys are good. And that's basically it. And then once mainnet launches, you should be included in the set. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds really cool. Yeah, then I'd say like, let's wrap up. I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing Edgeware launch, seeing like Kusama, seeing Polkadot and everything like here coming to life together.
Yeah.
So many different layers, such a complex system.
Yeah.
But also lots of experiments. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
And to our listeners, I will put like some links in the show notes, and see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Chorus One podcast. Visit chorus.one for more information about our work. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast to stay tuned on new episodes airing every Monday.